Bitcoin has continued to shock the world, and today is no different. Lots of news, of course, over the weekend. If you're watching this this week, you're probably already asking yourself a ton of questions. Hopefully, we're going to dive in and answer those today. My name is Paul Barron. This is Tech Path. Welcome back. All right, so the big question today is, of course, Bitcoin. But before we get started, a little bit about how we do these market movers. Market movers are pretty straightforward. This is something where we do a little bit of study and analysis on something that's happening in the market. We'll do a refresher on some of the data that we pull in, and then we actually provide some commentary on where we think the market might be going. Today, of course, this topic is Bitcoin and what kind of impacts are going to happen from a governmental side of things. Before, as you guys all know, this is not investment advice. This is an educational research package that is based on our own findings and options. We are not a financial advisor. And of course, always highly recommend that you do your own research before you invest in anything out there, including private investments. So do your due diligence and kind of get going. Let's talk about the scenarios that we're faced with here today. We're gonna look at are crackdowns coming? We're gonna look at the Turkey and India bans. And then also, could influencers be pumping Bitcoin? This is a question that I think a lot of you will want to really understand what I mean by that, because this is a big deal. Stick around to the video to make sure and check that as we get to it. And then, of course, corporate assets net no gains, get no gains. Now, this is something that a lot of people are missing. And this goes out to guys like Michael Saylor, who we've had on the show before, who are talking about, people and or corporations should be putting their treasury in Bitcoin. So I want to break down how it's going to affect you from an accounting standpoint. Let's jump to the first topic, which is kind of are crackdowns coming? Bitcoin and crypto markets crash on U.S. crackdown reports. This is what happened essentially over the weekend, even though we did see the aspect of Turkey and India kind of putting some pressure on this. But basically, it's experienced a massive sell-off, shedding almost 15% in the last 24 hours. This is the biggest intraday trading that we've seen since February. And if you kind of look at this chart, you can kind of see what happened. CoinMarketCap cited the blackout in China's Xinjiang region for the fall, which allegedly powers much of the Bitcoin mining. This was another big factor. And then on Sunday, this was just yesterday as we're recording this today, flagship crypto Bitcoin, of course, shed nearly 8,000, was trading at 12% lower at around 54.9. 54.9 would be one of its lowest that it's seen in its trailing 50-day, which is what a lot of Bitcoin analysts look at for it kind of moving into the next level. But if you look back into February, you saw a retreat as low as 43,000. So you can kind of see it's really kind of a little bit of an uncertain scenario here. I think one of the things that people are wondering, first of all, is 50 the new 60 or is 60 the new 50? Is kind of the factor with Coinbase's IPO going live last week and not really having much of an impact. We saw a very slight lift on Bitcoin moving up. And instead, at the end of the week and over the weekend on its first week, meaning Coinbase's first week as an IPO, we saw one of the biggest losses, of course, on Bitcoin. Here's the thing, though. By Sunday night, Bitcoin had bounced back to almost 57,000. So my question is always, is the scenario of Bitcoin, is it finally reaching a stable position, or are we seeing basically the bulls and the whales propping up Bitcoin to ensure that we continue to see retail investment in Bitcoin? So a lot of factors that kind of play into this. I want to jump to the impact of government bans, and the first thing you see here on India today. Turkey bans Bitcoin. This again, and other crypto coins for payments. This is primarily the situation. Now, I want to make sure I make this very clear. Turkey is not banning the use of Bitcoin. It's only the use of Bitcoin if you're planning to purchase something with it. So like the scenario of Elon and Tesla accepting Bitcoin for their cars, that's definitely not going to happen in Turkey. And that's one of the big things. When you look at the breakdown here, Turkey's decision comes after Royal Motors, which is basically the distributor of Rolls-Royce, and Lotus cars in the country became the first to announce that it would accept Bitcoin as currency, which is basically a follow-up on what Tesla was doing. This is the impact that you're going to see. I feel that this could impact the US and the UK in putting restrictions on potentially Bitcoin. Also, India, this is kind of, okay, so no company has officially announced that they're going to accept Bitcoins in India just yet as payment. However, reports in the past have suggested that many international crypto companies are looking at hiring engineers and back-end developers. This will be very interesting because they're talking about paying those people in it. That's another big factor. And then, of course, you have government reporting kind of moving into the factor. Here's where I think India starts to move differently than what Turkey is doing, and that is the Indian government has they've been very critical of cryptocurrencies, including Bitcoin. Earlier this year, proposed a bill which would speculate the blanket ban of all digital currencies apart from those sanctioned by the Reserve Bank of India. This is a consistent resistance from investors and industry players, which has delayed the financial decision on this matter. The scenario will be that many of these countries are going to start to require these companies to put Bitcoin on their balance sheets and also expose when they're actually transacting in the cryptocurrency space, which really starts to put some pressure on a lot of major, both public and also high volume companies in those countries to really kind of bring it out into the open. And that is one of the big knocks on Bitcoin that I think is an invalid one, is that there's a lot of money laundering and criminal activity that happens on Bitcoin. And the reality is there's much more money laundering and criminal activity that happens in traditional banking systems because they've been doing it for 3 decades. So that in its own right, I think, is a factor that many of you, if you're investing in cryptocurrency, need to consider, because there is a shift that is happening. And the words of Michael Saylor, if you haven't had a chance, by the way, of checking out our interview with Michael, check out the one where it was talking about could Bitcoin be replaced or could it die? This is kind of the scenario and the question. And one of the situations that I often deal with, both on, people just hitting me up on Twitter, or I get a ton of text messages and emails from a lot of the Bitcoin space, is this one of those categories of coins or all crypto that will eventually get hit and be really impacted due to government regulation? And I think that's going to be the factor that we have to look at. Here's one of the things, though, that I think you have to ask yourself. And if you look at gold, let's go to a chart here. If you look at gold ETFs versus where Bitcoin, this is a cryptocurrency, and specifically Bitcoin, you'll see here that essentially all Bitcoin funds are now hitting almost 2 trillion. This is showing about a $1 trillion valuation, but you can kind of see the occurrence of when that started to really kind of move on the needle, which was around August, September of last year when gold hit its high, and we saw gold start to move downward all the way through now, April of 2021. And Bitcoin, of course, at the same time, if you look at July, August, was when its mount on massive growth started to become. So the question will always be, did gold ETFs start to shift their capital holdings over to some of crypto, or are we seeing maybe a complete transition in how we're going to be looking at the monetary dollar, and how the globe might be looking at maybe even the petrodollar starting to shift that out? So what we did was we dove into a couple of things here. And mainly what we're looking at here is the Bitcoin sentiment comparison. And this was done on our ReverLab side. What we looked at, and what I did here, was I looked at the takeoffs and the dips on Bitcoin, and where did sentiment fall on people talking about this, mainly on social media. Because here's my theory, is that there are influencers on social media, here on YouTube, out in the podcast world, you guys all know their names, that are putting out so much content on Bitcoin that I feel like we may be getting a little bit of a almost a FOMO aspect of where Bitcoin is going due to what they're putting out. So if you kind of follow along here, this is going back in December of last year. Sentiment hovered in at around 67.80. Now, for a sentiment score, that's out of 100. That is not a big sentiment score. In other words, that's not great for Bitcoin. So if you look at sentiment in general, if you're ranking at a 75 plus, you've got a good sentiment score. If you rank into the 80s, now you're very respectable. And if you have a 90 sentiment score on anything, there's something special about what you're doing, whether it's a brand, a business, whatever the case may be. But if you look back in December of last year, 67.80, and then that small rise in through January, early January, which is where Bitcoin hit 39,000. Remember, this is early January 2021. Everybody thought, oh my God, Bitcoin is on its rise. Look at the sentiment numbers. They bounced to almost 80 point, well, it's 79.61. So when you look at 80 points on the sentiment scale on how we look at analysis for consumer sentiment and in general, retail investor in sentiment, this is a big jump. Now, here's where it gets interesting in this chart, because now I look at, do we see a fall off when Bitcoin basically took its first downward trend? And you'll notice I've got a trend line there, and there's a reason. I'll talk about that in a second. But this was where it dropped back down to 72. But look at the comparison between the December 10th number, which is at 67.80, and 1 month later, which is January 25th, and it bounced down to 72. So the baseline seemed to hold until we see the sentiment bounce on the basically the late January, which is, the 221 number, then bounced down to 70.11. So this is something that I'm looking at, is it seems to have these ebb and flows of sentiment on Bitcoin. People seem to jump in. You get a certain amount of kind of that FOMO, or people talking about it on social media, on YouTube. The videos like this one right here start to really crack out there. They get hundreds of thousands of views, and the next thing you know, you have a high sentiment score, and then boom, you have another Bitcoin rise. So we're trying to figure out if we can start predicting these. Now, we've done this in a few other industries. We've done it in food and some technology products, and we currently do this on some of the IPO trading, because we look at kind of the groundswell of what people are talking about. And I wish we had been tracking, some of the shorts, because we might have been able to predict out what was happening with GameStop. But the point being is that we are seeing these sentiment scores start to crack over 80. And this is the thing that I feel like for Bitcoin is a very positive scenario. Here's the problem. This last weekend, you'll notice right here on this chart, is that on 4/15, sentiment was at 80.51. And by that evening, due to some of the fears of uncertainty and also compiling what's happening in Turkey and India, bam, we get the lowest sentiment score we've had for the year on Bitcoin at 68.26. This is when that price was hitting at around 50, I think the 52 to 53 range. And of course, the bounce came back up. We haven't done recording on sentiment this morning because Bitcoin, of course, was trading at around 57 this morning. Again, this is such a volatile scenario. If you are investing, that's the number one thing you need to be aware of around Bitcoin, is the volatility is going to continue to be there. But the thing that concerns me here is the sentiment dipping under 70 for the first time since its meteoric rise of really December. This is what concerns me. So there's two routes that this can take. One, of course, is the typical route of, all right, the whales are going to just continue to buy. They're going to just soak up all the Bitcoin they can when Bitcoin drops. Or you're going to see retail investors start to get a little shaky and say, maybe I just need to invest over here on the IPO for Coinbase, and that's my gameplay for Bitcoin. Or you see institutional companies start to play in big time. So if the whales and the institutions really come in and reposition, we have a stable cryptocurrency. Most likely, if this thing cracks over 60 again over a weekend, this is the typical Bitcoin scenario. There are some things, though, that you need to be aware of that I think a lot of people are missing on the boat, and that is one of the biggest issues coming right here, and that's corporate investing in crypto. And let me explain this. This is a report and a study that was done by Deloitte Touche. They basically said, listen, if you are a company and you're putting treasury, your cash, into Bitcoin, this essentially is not the same kind of investment as a traditional investment. A traditional investment, market to market, let me kind of explain this because it's a little fuzzy. let's say we'll use Tesla, or let's use Apple. All right, because everybody says I talk about Tesla too much. Or oh, I forgot, I got a kiss. Yeah, that was my kiss to Tesla. Again, but in the comments, make sure and leave your notes down below. We'd like to hear that. I do not kiss their, you know what. But back to Apple. If you're buying Apple stock and you are a company, guess what? If Apple stock goes up, you get to put that as a cash increase in your balance sheet. If Apple stock goes down, you get to put that as a cash decrease on your balance sheet. Not the same with crypto. This is called an intangible asset. And it's a classification for basically assets that cannot be used in your, and I from the accounting rules as I understand it, and I talked to someone last night, I ended up calling one of my CPA and CFO friends, and I said, how does this work? It's an investment. Why would you not be able, if crypto goes up double, why would you not be able to claim that as an asset and it would double the value of your company? And his basic term is, because it's an intangible asset, accounting rules apply. And the accounting rules are that you cannot take it until you sell it. If you sell the asset and you make money on it, it is no longer an intangible asset because you're dealing with a US dollar sale, most likely. So you've received your capital, which is the first taboo of any Bitcoin holder, is they're never selling. So this is a problem, I think, for corporations to really look at how they're going to be able to invest treasury into Bitcoin. So if you're like Elon Musk and you're putting over $1 billion into it and the thing doubled, guess what? You don't get to take that billion and put that into your balance sheet to where your investors can take advantage of that in the bump. It's all intangible assets, and you won't be able to retrieve that capital gain until you actually sell the intangible asset. So this is a scenario that I think many companies are now going to start to look at. The other thing that is happening in the Bitcoin space is because there's so much traction and because now governments are getting involved in this, including the scenario with Turkey and India, and now the threat here in the United States of potentially controlling certain regulatory points on Bitcoin. This is where accounting rules are going to start to apply. Companies are going to start to look at this, and the IRS is going to create a whole new spectrum of scenarios that could play into this. Now, two schools of thought here. Some people think that all this regulation is a good thing because it stabilizes crypto as a real economic powerhouse, and it becomes a market that basically is approaching almost, 25% of gold's market. So you've got a product that is a stored value that could really become stable. If it becomes stable, here's the flip side, is the likelihood of us seeing these massive growth numbers start to really slow, unless some things like the whole pump and dump approach starts to hit. So here's the big questions. First one, volume flow of digital influencers have grown 815% in the past year. What is a digital influencer? Basically, these are Bitcoin millionaires that have made their money in Bitcoin, and they are putting out content, social media posts, putting out it's kind of like the, I don't know if you guys ever watched Tai Lopez, which is the became a YouTube star basically with Here in My Garage. Go check one of those videos out. You'll understand what I'm talking about. That kind of growth and meteoric rise and cash influx to these influencers has happened. And what's occurring when you look at the number, and I've got some data on this that we're going to be revealing here soon, on the number of videos, social media, podcasts, and content that is hitting the market that is what I think could be I won't say falsifying the support, but it's almost that whole theory of pump and dump, meaning you pump the stock and you dump it when it's at its critical point. This is my concern with Bitcoin right now, is that we have so many influencers that are moving into the market. Just so you guys are clear, I'm a Bitcoin maximalist. I believe this is the future of money, if we want to call it money, the future of stored value. The question is, where is its real number? Is it really a $30,000 product or device or instrument, or is it a $100,000, or in some cases, if you listen to some of these influencers, a $400,000 instrument? That's the question that I think everybody is having to ask themselves, and I think that's the scenario we're dealing with. So what will be the impact should the US or the UK put any restrictions on Bitcoin? This is where I think it gets really dicey, because at that point you will see a hit on Bitcoin and all cryptocurrencies, I think, in general. But if the UK and the US put any kind of restrictions, especially on accepting it for payment, this could really dampen the Bitcoin future and also kind of change the structure in which it will grow. The other aspect, of course, is how will accounting rules challenge the conversion of Treasury on the books? That's going to be the last factor, I think, that really kind of guides its own way, is because accounting rules have been enforced for decades. Companies abide by certain accounting stipulations just to be able to provide a P&L and an investment or a return analysis, especially if you're a publicly traded company. You're providing all these these documents to the SEC, which have to be accurate and have to be applied to current and most updated accounting rules. So all those kind of things really start to play into this. So this is a very, very interesting time in which we are living. If you are a Bitcoin investor, maybe you got in early, kudos to you. The question I have is now, when Bitcoin hits that 60, or what a lot of people think is going to be the new horizon at 70,000, is that the time to exit? And I know that's sacrilegious to say for all the HODL people out there, #HODL. I will probably be one of those that rides that that elevator to the top and then fiery plummet of that gondola as it crashes down the east side of the Alps. But hopefully that's not the case. We'll see how it all plays out. If you want to stay tuned right here on TechPath, this is where we get it all, man. We bring you as much analysis as we can. We try to bring in a little bit of data, and the best of all is we do it as fast as we can, and hopefully it's hitting you guys at the time when you're making these kinds of decisions and can help you on your research. If you are listening to the podcast, make sure and subscribe. Also give us a rating over there. If you're listening here on YouTube or watching, make sure and hit the like, hit the bell, and also subscribe to the channel. And make sure, if you have an idea for a show, shoot us an email to producer@revernetworks.com, or you can hit me up on Twitter @Paul Barron. We'll catch you next time right here on TechPath.